The Crow, universally hated and regarded as a terrible remake. What the hell happened, and why is this movie an absolute failure? For this video, I want to answer that question in depth and to do an analysis of the 4 primary aspects that make this movie truly horrendous. I also rewatched the original Crow recently, so I'll bring an additional perspective of a comparative analysis between the 2 films. The first and most damning reason why the Crow remake is so much worse in comparison to the original is that it fundamentally fails on the premise of the movie. Bill Skarsgård's character, Eric, doesn't actually become the Crow until an hour and 13 minutes into the film. For reference, the runtime is an hour and 40 minutes. On a technicality though, he receives his power at the 40-minute mark, but it's not the entire thing, and thus, he doesn't become the full version until the end. So this leaves only 27 minutes of screen time, which was the primary selling point of the movie. So you may be thinking, what the hell happens during the first 40 minutes? Well, the writers decided to give extensive backstory and screen time for primarily establishing the romance between the 2 main characters. Keep in mind that the original Crow opens on the crime scene of their deaths and entirely skips over this development the new film offers. You may be thinking how that would be better, but the original approaches this narrative by implying the love between these characters, which is more efficient. Throughout the film, we are shown flashes of the love between these 2 people that further reinforces the loss and keeps driving the main character. It's a slow drip feed of information that also makes the original more captivating, because it's a mystery. We don't really know who this person is, and we slowly learn about him as he carries out his revengeful acts, and by the end, we fully sympathize with his drive. Along with there being other established characters that you care about the well-being for, that's entirely absent in the remake, which I'll get into a bit more later. So because of this efficiency in simply implying the love, it allows the full runtime to primarily focus on the Crow's journey of revenge. For the new film, the writer attempts at creating a stronger bond between the audience and these characters by showing us them falling in love. However, this doesn't work because of how poorly written it is. Like, let me just play this clip of one of their first interactions.
What kind of tea is hard to drink?
I don't know.
Reality.
Are you serious?
It feels like this was written by someone who has never experienced love before, and even though we're spending quite a bit of time on this romance, it still comes across as rushed and forced. Like, why is Shelley so intrigued by Eric initially? He's just sitting alone eating food, and the writers try to establish that he's this black sheep and is getting bullied by everyone. But at the same time, the writers don't show us why he's this outcast. This immediately is a fumble on character building because we're just shown him getting bullied without the critical piece of why it's happening. That part establishes character traits, like maybe make it to where he stands up to these people for doing something wrong, which would imply that he's courageous, heroic, and fights for what is right. Maybe you can even have a mirror in which he tries to fight this group and gets demolished, which would act as a good point of contrast of character growth to the end of the movie. The writer doesn't do any of this, and we're just thrown into a very uncompelling romance with 2 characters that aren't properly set up, and thus we don't care about them. So in this facility, they have 2 scenes together, and then the people who are hunting her comes here to try and find her. Since her friend sent her a video of illegal things they've done, and in response to this, Eric and Shelley escape the facility. Which is pretty silly on its own, but whatever. That would be going off topic if I went into that. From there, they're basically ride or die soulmates, which doesn't feel earned and comes off as being rushed, and the writing obviously doesn't improve.
If I jumped, you'd jump with me.
Of course I would.
Do you think angsty teens would build little shrines for us?
So this fundamentally raises the question of why would you commit almost half of the runtime to such a poorly executed romance?
Is this me?
This makes the entire first act a complete and utter slog to get through, and it's honestly commendable if anyone actually gets through it. This is especially made even worse because of how gracefully the original handles this through implications and brief flashes of love throughout. And it's also even crazier that the new movie does this too at one point, which comes across as egregiously redundant since we sat through all of the romantic buildup already. So in essence, the new film trades out the plot of the Crow taking out his targets one by one and thus invoking this immense fear amongst them, with a big climactic action scene in the end that's supposed to have this major catharsis, since we're supposed to have a deeper connection to these characters when that's not the case.
We do not care.
Pivoting away from the writing for a bit, a part of what made the original Crow iconic was its style and tone. The Crow came out during the 90s, which was like the punk rock era of Hollywood. We had movies like Strange Days, The Matrix, and even Blade to an extent that were all similar in style to The Crow. However, The Crow was by far and away a full commitment to this gothic and edgier rock tone. After rewatching it especially, the movie kind of feels more like a vibe film with this supremely domineering style. Visually, the film employs a mix of noir and gothic elements, using high contrast lighting, shadowy cityscapes, and rain-soaked streets to create a sense of bleakness and despair. The rain is constant and suffocating the city, which is kind of a metaphor for the constant onslaught of crime. The color palette is predominantly muted with lots of blacks, grays, and dark blues, reflecting the dark themes of the story. The city is grungy with garbage everywhere, and the city comes off as a character in of itself. It's a representation of society on the brink of collapse, with rampant crime terrorizing and putting everyone into jeopardy. This also services the story because Eric's antagonist is directly responsible for the city being in this state. So by him achieving his goals, he's also repairing and cleansing the city of its filth. Now, looking over at the remake, it's as generically shot as you can possibly imagine. There's a complete lack of visual identity and uniqueness, and they also barely achieve a gothic or dark tone. In the original, there's constant blaring gothic rock, but in the new one, there are 2 scenes where that happens, and the music in question is mostly just somber. There's barely any energy, it doesn't feel like the cinematography tries to invoke a darker style, and the city feels completely sanitized and comes nowhere close to the grit of the original. It doesn't even seem like they dressed the settings in which they shot the movie. Or maybe the director just didn't care about having the world reflect the themes within the film. A recent movie as an example that creates an immaculate and dark world is The Batman, which oddly feels thematically and stylistically more like a Crow movie than the actual remake. This all comes down to the director, and looking at his filmography, all of his movies seem wholly uninspired and lack a unique vision. Because of this massive stylistic downgrade from the original, it just makes it seem like the remake was a cheap cash grab, and the executives picked some random director with no passion behind making the film. Some people even argue that the original Crow is a product of its time because we don't really get those rave-induced gothic movies anymore, that are also normally really bleak and dark thematically. Which this is pretty much stemming into the next issue in that the Crow remake feels significantly more sanitized from a writing standpoint. Now there is still violence and even ultra-violence, and I did genuinely like that aspect. To give the movie some credit before going back into its faults, the ending set piece where Eric infiltrates the opera house was great. The action was amazing, and every single moment and kill was creative and clever. As an example, the scene opens with one of the guards using a toothpick to clean his teeth, and then Eric impales his skull with the sword going through his mouth, which is essentially a much bigger toothpick. Then, one other insane moment was Eric getting stabbed from behind, shooting the person behind him through his own torso, and then impaling the person under him with the sword still in his stomach, John Wick style. The action in this scene is simply crazy, and the quality shift is so drastic that I wouldn't be surprised if the second unit director made this scene on his own, or if they just blew most of their budget on this scene. Along with the scene having great editing where they cross-cut the opera performance with the massacre. Although, from a writing standpoint, this is extremely similar to The Godfather Part 3, where the climax is also a cross-cut opera scene where shit is going down during the show. So even though this is a great scene, it still comes across as being a bit derivative narratively. Besides the brief action bits in the movie, everything else feels like it's PG-13. By far the best way to illustrate this point is the difference in antagonists. In the original, the gang that killed Eric and his girlfriend brutally tortured them while also R-wording his girlfriend. In the remake, the bad guys suddenly put plastic bags over their heads and suffocate them within like 10 seconds. The worst or most animated thing that happens is one of the goons kisses Shelly's cheek in front of Eric, which is basically a minor taunt. So right away, that's significantly less violent, and the antagonists at this point don't really earn the hatred the audience should have for them to bind us to the main protagonist's misery. In the original, there's also this bar scene that fleshes out the gang more, in which they do these vile and disgusting things like putting out cigarettes on their tongues and eating bullets, and in general just being absolute scum to people. We never receive this in the remake, and the writer pivots the villain from being this violent gang to this billionaire who has some goons that do his dirty work. And the goons are basically just these generic people with zero characterization. Outside of them achieving the bare minimum of doing what they were told and killing Eric and Shelly, there's literally no other reason for the audience to actually despise these people. Just like the original, the way you achieve that is through the gross and completely over-the-top nature in which they carry out their execution. So on top of having a main villain, his henchmen are also despicable, characterized, and thus hated by the audience. Like, let's compare the two scenes in which Eric finds and kills his first antagonist. In the original, Eric has a full-blown confrontation where they fight in the mud, they are constantly communicating and taunting each other, and the way he kills him is pretty brutal. The remake's rendition of that scene is Eric finding the goon in a car outside the building he's guarding. He gets in and briefly talks to him before having to shoot him since he reaches for his gun. Then the other goons die very quickly in the opera scene, and it feels like their deaths were afterthoughts. None of them had any semblance of a personality. The only partial saving grace is that the main villain has a more intriguing fictional power, but he still comes across as being dull and mundane throughout the movie. In general though, the villain force comes nowhere close to the extremely dark and gritty antagonists from the original. Another downgrade in the writing is the movie being much more shallow. The original had more side characters that also served a direct purpose within that film, like this orphan-type child whose mother is constantly neglecting motherhood, and this cop who is essentially a force of righteousness and trying to do what's right. These two characters give the movie a thematic counterbalance that kind of rationalizes the extreme violence that Eric commits throughout the film. He may be serving a personal goal of vengeance, but this also co-aligns with helping these other characters, because he's bettering society by taking on this criminal underworld. In the remake, these characters are non-existent, and there aren't really any others. There are minor characters here and there, but they have practically no characterization and barely service the story. This, especially paired with the lack of characterization on the villain side, makes this movie feel even shallower, which is pretty crazy considering that the remake is longer than the original. The only new character, quote-unquote, is this godlike entity in the Crow Realm, or whatever this place is, where Eric goes when he falls into water or dies. And the reason why I put quotation marks around character is because basically just a plot device that delivers exposition. Of anyone in the movie, he has zero personality and has no character traits, and he may as well just be the writer showing up to tell everyone how the powers work. In the original, this is communicated via voiceover from the child character, but it's done so after the fact, and it's as if she's telling this urban legend of how the crow saved the city from immense crime. So it works as natural exposition since it has a justified source within the narrative, and not just some entity describing the mechanics of the power so the audience isn't confused. Although, Eric getting an upgrade to his power is still confusing to me. Another downgrade that makes the movie even shallower is that it feels like there's practically no commentary. The only semblance of commentary is the villain giving the statement of everyone has this evil in them, and he unlocks it, but besides that, it's just a self-contained microstory of this guy getting revenge because he was in love. While the original had a lot more commentary on society, crime, motherhood, and general morality, which were generally explored through those additional characters, and the writer actually imbued Eric with charisma and lots of dialogue. While in the remake, he's like a brooding, upset child. The difference in main characters is staggering. One last thing that I think really punctuates how purely bad this movie is how consistently dumb it is. Like, this movie just shouldn't work at all since characters are constantly making baffling decisions, or there being massive conveniences within the writing that occur for the story to even operate in the first place. I could honestly do a full devoid of logic video on this movie, but I'll just list out all the absurd things that happen. This billionaire figure with top professional henchmen are somehow so amateurish to the point that they just dump bodies into a river that are immediately found by the police. If they were at that level, you think they'd actually know how to dispose of bodies and would probably have acid or something. I guess if they were able to do this, then Eric wouldn't realistically be able to come back. The entire event that sets this conflict into motion is someone recording the villain making someone kill another person. But like, why would he allow this to be recorded if he's looking right into the camera? And then this gets out and his henchmen have to clean all of this up and hunt Shelly down since her friend sends her the video. She escapes and goes to a rehabilitation center, and it's honestly a miracle that she wasn't intercepted by the bad guys much earlier, since they have cops on their payroll. Them also escaping the facility is an obvious major convenience, but when they escape, they just go back to their homes, which is insanely dumb. If you're being hunted down by these hitman-esque figures, then they'll definitely know where you live. It's crazily lucky that they lasted for quite a long time since multiple days go by until they get captured. There's someone who warns Shelly earlier in the movie and leaves, and Eric somehow locates him despite not knowing him at all. The main villain apparently has no security at his mansion, even though the opera house had a huge force. This reinforces the potential notion that they ran out of budget to film more action. Also, the confrontation between the villain and Eric is so tropey, as Eric doesn't simply just kill him, and allows himself to be surprised and overpowered by the villain through a distracting monologue.
My soul for hers.
Even if you save her, you will never be with her again.
Then he immediately sees Shelly again after killing the main villain, even though that's a fundamental contradiction in the writing. Maybe the executives changed the ending and forgot about the established consequences earlier. That and she also comes back to life and is resuscitated in the past when they initially died, which just makes no sense at all. Wouldn't all the bad guys still be alive in the past? Is this a new reality? It's literally daytime and they were killed at night, meaning that she's been dead for hours. What the fuck is happening? I thought when they said they were saving her soul from hell, she was going to heaven, but she gets revived in real life. So yeah, those were just the main issues, and that's not even me diving deeper into the absurd and idiotic writing. In conclusion, every aspect of the remake besides the action is a massive downgrade. The writing style and tone in comparison to the original is a complete joke that it probably makes this movie one of the worst remakes of all time. Thank you for watching, and my Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description. As usual, thank you so much to Logan Farmer for being a top patron.